afternoon. I am delighted to be here with all of you and joined by our speaker, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Congressman Takano will be here momentarily, Leader Schumer, the lead sponsor of the Equality Act in the Senate, Senator Merkley, and two of our greatest champions, of course, Senator Gorsuch and Senator Baldwin. Today, the House will take up and pass for the second time the Equality Act, H.R. 5. And we are really excited to have the incredible support of President Biden and his commitment to make the Equality Act the law of the land. As you all know, our country was the first country founded on the principle of liberty and justice for all. And we have made progress in that quest. We've stumbled sometimes, but we've made some progress. But the LGBTQ community, while having made some progress, continues to be in this fight for full equality. In most states, members of the LGBTQ community are at risk of losing an apartment, being denied credit, being turned away from service on a jury, all because of who they are or who they love. Every American deserves respect and dignity, and it's important that the Equality Act become law because it will once and for all ensure that LGBTQ Americans can live lives free of discrimination. And in particular, it amends the existing civil rights architecture. It adds sexual orientation and gender identity to employment, education, housing, credit, jury service, public accommodations, and federal funding. It's a fully inclusive civil rights law that will once and for all make discrimination illegal in this country. Finally, it's not a controversial issue anymore. 83% of Americans support anti-discrimination legislation for LGBTQ Americans. 68% of Republican voters. So this is not a controversial issue. We've built a coalition that ranges in everyone from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to the ACLU and everyone in between. Over 600 major organizations, hundreds of business leaders representing some of the most important companies in America all support the Equality Act. And I'll end with just a word in remembrance of our extraordinary colleague, the late John Lewis, who at a very critical moment in our fight for the Equality Act made certain that people understood the urgency of this action and the importance of doing this comprehensive bill. And I hope in his honor we will finally make the Equality Act the law of the land. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce the Senate sponsor, the lead sponsor of the Senate, Senator Jacobin.
The Equality Act is all about freedom. President Lyndon Johnson said the freedom is the right to share fully and equally in American society. It is the right to be treated in every part of our national life as a person equal in dignity and promise to all others. But today, LGBTQ Americans are not free. They do not share fully and equally in our national life. They are not treated as individuals equal in dignity and promise to all others. In 29 states, it is still legal today to discriminate against Americans because of who they are and whom they love. In over half the states of the Union, LGBTQ Americans can be married in the morning, ejected from a restaurant at lunch, denied a mortgage, dismissed from jury in the afternoon, evicted from their house that night. It is way past time we change that. Way past time we pass a National Equality Act. Together, we all introduced this bill in 2015. In fact, John Lewis was standing right here, well, not in this room, but across from the Senate side. And I think, as David mentioned, that his presence was powerful then, and as we think of him, it's powerful now. And he said we should get in good trouble, engage in good trouble. And we need a lot of good trouble to get this bill passed. In 2019, we had a powerful moment in May 17, 2019, with consideration of the passage of the Equality Act in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I applaud my House colleagues for that tremendous victory. Well done. That was an awesome moment. But the leadership of the Senate at that same time refused to hold a vote, refused to hold a debate, refused to hold a hearing on this fundamental issue of freedom. But this year, 2021, it's different. We have leadership of the House and leadership of the Senate that supports this vision of opportunity and equality for all. We also have a tremendous number of civil rights partners that are taking us forward in this effort. The NAACP, the Human Rights Campaign, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the National Urban League, that are working passionately and diligently to make sure we get this right. And this year is different because we have a President, Joe Biden, who believes in the dignity and humanity of every American. And it's different because we have more Senate sponsors. And as David mentioned, we have more organizations. We have more businesses. We have more religious organizations with us at this moment. My friends, it is time we end this dark history of prejudice and discrimination and ring the bells of freedom for opportunity and equality for all. It is my pleasure now to introduce the Speaker of the House, Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you for your leadership on this important issue. It's an honor to welcome you over to the House side. It's always a pleasure to welcome back the distinguished, now majority leader of the Senate back. Senator,
Pleasure to be back.
and even more of a pleasure with Senator Baldwin with you returning to the House. We always took such pride in her being in the House, and then when she went on to the Senate as well. And thank you for being here for this very special occasion for all of us. Senator Booker, welcome to the House. Not necessarily back, but welcome. And it's an honor to be here with Mr. Chicano, the chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, but a leader in the Equality Caucus, and of course, our chair of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler, who has made so many things possible for us. It's an honor to be with you. David Cicilline is a person we're very, very proud of, and we thank you, David, for giving us this opportunity today, and to you, Senator Merkley. Senator Merkley referenced when we were together 5 years ago. We were in the LBJ room, as a matter of fact. We were on the Senate side when this Equality Act was introduced. Senator Merkley, Congressman Cicilline were the lead sponsors, but as Senator Merkley mentioned, right there standing with them was John Lewis, and that was very important. Again, we stood there with an icon of the civil rights movement in a room named for LBJ, who had been the sponsor who fought for and signed the Civil Rights Bill. The Civil Rights Act is a pillar of freedom in our country. It is not amended lightly. So how proud were we to have our beloved, as I said, John Lewis and the Congressional Black Caucus with us on that day as they gave their imprimatur to opening up the Civil Rights Act to end discrimination against the LGBTQ community. The two sponsors of the bill have said why this is necessary. It shouldn't be necessary, but why it is necessary and why it's important for us to act. And as we remember John Lewis's life, we remember his words spoken at the Pride Parade in Atlanta, shortly after being diagnosed with cancer. We are one people, one family. We all live in the same house. And those words have been an inspiration to us. In closing, I just want to say that our two lead sponsors, Dr. Merkley and Mr. Cicilline, talked about the outside groups who are endorsing this legislation. And I want to thank all of them. For some, it's the easiest thing in the world. For others, it took a level of courage and, shall we say, fortitude to go forward. But all of them, very important as we do our inside maneuvering to get as many votes as possible, hopefully as bipartisan as possible. The outside mobilization, so it's essential to bring have a drumbeat across America for freedom, for liberty, and justice for all. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm going to excuse myself to go to the floor as we have the bill on the floor right now, and I don't want to lose my time. I don't know who's in charge there, but I don't want to lose my time. With that, I'm very pleased to yield to the distinguished former member of the House, now Majority Leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and a champion on this issue when he was in the House and now as the leader in the Senate. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Speaker Pelosi. It's great to be here. I want to thank all of my colleagues. I want to thank my dear colleague, Senator Merkley, for his steadfast, unrelenting passion on this issue. He reminds us every day how we have to pass the Equality Act, because that's what America is all about. And Jeff has been a great leader here, and I thank him. Tammy Baldwin, of course, is one of our just outstanding senators who's been right by Jeff's side pushing this bill. And I want to thank all of the House sponsors and Senator Cory Booker, who is also at Mr. Merkley's side pushing this legislation. And I want to start by addressing head-on some of the despicable comments made by a few Republicans about trans people. Their attacks on trans people in the transgender community are just mean, and show a complete lack of understanding, a complete lack of empathy. They don't represent our views, and they don't represent the views of a majority of Americans. Their despicable comments just make my blood boil with anger. I can never mask it, you see my teeth gritting. But that's why we're here today, to talk about the Equality Act. That's why we need it, because of the hate out there that gets in the way of the great American dream of equality. In many ways, the story of America has been about making those words true for all Americans. That's what brings us here today, to reintroduce the Equality Act in the Senate. Essential, urgent, long overdue. That will move us closer to a society where all Americans are equally treated under the law. Even today, the signs of discrimination based on sexual orientation abound. From education to housing to family planning, from the workplace to adoption to immigration. Discrimination against LGBTQ plus people remains a serious problem that demands Congress's attention. Congress must pass the Equality Act so that LGBTQ plus Americans will no longer have to face discrimination in some of these most basic areas of life. This legislation is personal to me. Just 6 years ago, LGBTQ Americans like my daughter won the legal right to marry who they love. The Equality Act would make sure she can continue living her life with her wife with the security and dignity of knowing she won't face basic discrimination because of who she is. I'm so proud of her. So proud. Now, no American should ever face discrimination because of who they are and who they love. When the Equality Act passed the Congress last year, it was a bipartisan vote. Yet for years, Leader McConnell buried the Equality Act and other common-sense bipartisan House-passed bills in his legislative graveyard. Those days are over. Those days are over. Now, with Democrats in the majority, the Senate will have the opportunity to act on this critical civil rights legislation. I will use my power as majority leader to put it on the floor and let's see where everybody stands. Let's see where everybody stands. I'm hopeful that just like in the House, the Equality Act will get Republican votes and pass the Senate with bipartisan support. And of course, we now have an ally in the White House with President Biden who's promised to make the Equality Act a priority. Discrimination against LGBTQ Americans should be over once and for all. And Democrats will fight tooth and nail to make sure that that happens. And now I'm going to turn it over to a dear friend, a fellow New Yorker, who whenever it comes to civil rights is at the forefront, Congressman Gerald Natalie.
Thank you very much, Chuck. First, let me begin by thanking Congressman Cicilline for his leadership on this landmark legislation, and thanking Speaker Pelosi for her steadfast support of this legislation. The Equality Act represents one of the most significant opportunities we have had to expand civil rights in this country in many, many years. For a long time, whenever the LGBTQ community came to Congress, it was to defend their rights. From the Defense of Marriage Act, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Even when we considered ENDA, there was a major discussion as to whether we can include protections for transgender people. It is not lost on me that this is only the second time in history that Congress has been able to consider truly comprehensive LGBTQ civil rights legislation. And I could not be more proud of the gains we have made to even be standing here today. By freeing the LGBT community from discrimination, the Equality Act makes America a little more free for everyone. We cannot rely on the Supreme Court to continue to advance these issues for us. Instead, I expect that without the Equality Act, we will begin to see the court chipping away at the rights the LGBT community has already had acknowledged. I am hopeful that with Majority Leader Schumer at the helm of the Senate and President Biden in the White House, that we have a chance to see this signed into law and to take decisive action against the discrimination faced by the LGBT community nationwide. Thank you very much. Like Speaker Pelosi, I have to get back to the floor for the debate. But before I do that, it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Booker.
It is so good that we are here today, but let's be clear. I would not be here today if it wasn't for foot soldiers of justice who fought to push this body to pass civil rights legislation that gave me and other African Americans equal dignity, equal rights, and equal opportunity in this country. John Lewis, who was past us, bled for that right. And so now here we are again, in a nation where the ideals of liberty and equality and equal justice under law are what we say, how we define our aspirations, but we still fall short. We still live in a nation where the destructive darkness of discrimination reigns, enshrined in the laws of this land that prevent equal dignity and equal equality to LGBTQ Americans. That is unacceptable. And so let us all feel the fierce urgency of now, to not just see this legislation pass in the United States House of Representatives, but for the sake of our ancestors and generations to come, may it pass in the Senate and get to the floor, get to the desk of the President of the United States for the signature. Thank you. And now I bring up Representative Takano.
Thank you, Senator, for reminding us of the history of civil rights and how important those foot soldiers were. And I remember being at my first inauguration with President Obama. He evoked the image of Seneca Falls, Selma, and Stonewall, drawing that direct line of civil rights history of the nation becoming a more perfect union. Thank you to David Cicilline for amazing efforts of building this coalition. It's truly moving to be here. And Chairman Nadler had to get back to the floor, but if you've ever had Chairman Nadler tell you stories about his conversations with Donald Trump, Jerry, before LGBT members were really a presence on the Hill, there was Jerry. So we are so proud of him. Senator Merkley, we're so proud of the work that you've done. Amazing work. And I want to talk to you more about what we're going to talk about. David, we're going to talk to you. All right. Almost 30 years ago, I was outed in my first campaign for Congress. 27 years ago, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was established in the military. 25 years ago, the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, was signed into law. And nearly 10 years ago, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. 7 years ago, in the United States v. Windsor case, it struck down DOMA. 5 years ago, marriage equality became the law of the land. And less than a year ago, the Supreme Court extended non-discrimination protections to LGBTQ people in the workplace. And today, we are just one step closer to full equality under the law. And that's real progress. But despite the strides that we have made toward greater acceptance for LGBTQ people, in a majority of states, 27 to be exact, our communities still face discrimination, and they do not enjoy the same civil rights as other Americans. They do not have the recourse to go to court or to ensure that they are treated fairly. This is particularly harmful, especially to especially vulnerable members of our community, trans people and queer people of color, who face greater discrimination and violence motivated by hate, and what really, as Senator Schumer alluded to, gets my blood boiling, is the irony of people who are murdered and beat up, who are victims of discrimination, being made the bogeyman of this bill. How insidiously ironic is that the opponents of this bill are using the people who are victimized the most, who need the protections of this bill the most, as the argument against passing this bill. How absurd is that? The Equality Act would be a powerful tool to protect these most vulnerable people in our country, A great nation cares about the dignity and well-being of its most vulnerable citizens. Today, as I go back to the floor, and thankfully the leader's going to take her magic, the speaker's going to take her magic minute on the floor to extend the amount of time I have here. But I'm going to cast my vote. I'll be thinking of all the LGBTQ activists who marched, protested, and built a movement to protest the lives of LGBTQ people and expand their rights. I'm ready to go vote. And before I do, I want to introduce a pioneer, a hero of mine. I knew her when she was back in the House and watched her become a senator with the integrity of being elected to office, already out, not coming out afterwards. Truly a trailblazer, Senator Baldwin.
Well, I want to start by thanking my colleagues for your courage and your standing up and getting us to this moment. I feel like we should have a drum roll because soon the House will vote for the second time to advance the Equality Act. I appreciated everybody's comments, but I wanted to also appreciate Leader Schumer's comments with two regards. One is decrying and condemning in the strongest of terms the unfortunate and hateful remarks of some of our colleagues. And the level of ignorance is unacceptable. And but I also hearken back to the power of the LGBTQ movement of visibility helping to change hearts and minds. And that's what this long movement is about. I secondly appreciated Leader Schumer's personal remarks. You know, he said it's personal for me. And I will certainly say this is personal for me too. Not only as a member of the LGBTQ community, but for my brief time as a practicing attorney before I was full-time involved in public service. I had the occasion to represent clients in the LGBTQ community who had faced discrimination at the workplace or in seeking housing. And I got to see how devastating that can be, especially when the law falls short in terms of protections. In a majority of states and local jurisdictions, LGBT Americans live without fully inclusive non-discrimination laws and can still face discrimination because of who they are or who they love. And that's just wrong. And it's time to end this kind of discrimination against the LGBTQ community. All Americans should have the full freedom of equality. It's why we're here today. It's why I'm so proud to stand with my colleagues in the House and Senate as the House prepares to pass the Equality Act. We've been here before. This year, we have a pro-equality majority in both the House and the Senate. And we have a president who is pro-equality and prepared to sign this bill when it gets to his desk. So, let's just get the job done. Let's pass the Equality Act in the House and Senate. Let's send it to President Biden so he can sign it into law, and we can finally provide full equality for every LGBTQ American across our country. David, I think we're back to post Q&A.
So I too have to get back to the floor, but we have time at least for a few questions. Yes, sir.
First thing, and if I can ask two questions real quick. The first one, how do you get the 60 votes in the Senate that you need to pass this? And two, off topic, but Chief Pittman today said that there's a group of militia members may have been here on the 6th who were plotting to perhaps blow up the Capitol or express a desire to blow up the Capitol around the State of the Union. I'm curious, given all we've learned about the response and the intelligence failures, how safe you all feel and your confidence level in the security of the police.
I'll defer responding to that at another time, if that's okay, because I need to get to the vote. I hesitate to speculate about the Senate, but I'll just say one thing before I invite one of the senators to say. But you know, it's the good old-fashioned way. We're going to make our case. Our community is going to advocate with members of the Senate, and we're going to work hard until we get the votes necessary to pass it. There's no shortcut for it. You know, this is really an instance in which the Senate of the United States has to catch up to the American people. As I mentioned, it's overwhelmingly supported Republicans, Democrats, and Independents by 83% of the American people. Another poll shows a majority of voters in every single state in America support non-discrimination protections for the LGBTQ community. So the biggest challenge we face is a lot of people think it's already the law. When you tell them that someone can, get kicked out of their apartment, be denied service in a restaurant, or not be allowed to serve on a jury because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, they can't believe that's true. And that's because it doesn't comport with our basic understanding of fairness and equality in this country. So there's not a shortcut. We're going to work hard and get the votes, and obviously the senators will have some tricks up their sleeve about how we do that.
Your question immediately assumes that Republicans will insist on cloture, 60 votes to close debate. And I was thinking about how when Ted Kennedy first brought the Employment Non-Discrimination Act to the floor, back in, I believe it was 1998, we had no one in opposition ask for cloture. So we have a story here of how dramatically the Senate has changed. And I can tell you, as one senator, I do not believe that Mitch McConnell should be able to veto a bill the majority of the Senate supports that is about fundamental human rights. But we're not in 1998, and we are, though, closer to 2013. And in 2013, I took the Employment Non-Discrimination Act to the floor, and we did not have 60 votes, and we had to get 60 votes, and we worked it. We worked it in partnership with our organizations that are civil rights organizations that have huge insight on the nuances of the language and the law, and we worked it with our colleagues. And our colleagues shared their stories, and we ended up with a vote that was 2-1, bipartisan in support, and that is the path we're going to work to achieve this year.
What specifically would you want to tell Republican, your colleagues, about, they're talking about an infringement on religious liberties, bringing more lawsuits against churches and places of worship?
We were very careful in the Equality Act to ensure that the religious exemptions which currently exist remain undisturbed. And so what I would first say is, in the same way that all of the other areas of civil rights law have established religious exemptions, they would apply in the same way to the provisions of the Equality Act. The LGBTQ community is not looking for more protections, nor are we willing to accept less. Just treat it the same as all the other protected classes. So religious organizations would still enjoy the rights they have in terms of their ministerial functions, to limit their services and facilities to members of their own congregation, to members of their own faith and good standing, as they determine. All those exemptions which have been established remain in place. And so that's been an argument that has been advanced, but we have two interests that are protected here: the right to religious expression and the deeply held commitment to ending discrimination. The Equality Act achieves both of those things.
Add to that, the Bostock versus Clayton County decision has basically extended to the entire nation one portion of the Equality Act relating to employment, obviously a critical one, but by doing so has kept intact the current and existing religious exemptions. So that's now the reality in the United States. And so I just wanted to underscore what David Cicilline just said, that we want no more, nor should we accept any less.
Thank you, Senator.
Can we take one more?
On the COVID relief package, Senator Schumer this morning said it was a...
Is there any question on the Equality Act? Because
Sure.
I got to run to the floor.
I have one.
Yes.
Chris Stewart has signaled that he's going to introduce on Friday the Fairness for All Act as an alternative to the Equality Act with bipartisan support. Would that bill be better than nothing?
No, that bill very clearly is worse than nothing. For the first time in our history, would actually put in federal statute provisions that permit discrimination against the LGBTQ community. It would be a tremendous step backward, which is why it's not supported by any major LGBT organization. All of the major LGBT organizations support the Equality Act. The Stewart bill is a tremendous step backward in our fight for full equality.
Any problem with Democrats co-sponsoring that bill?
I'm sorry.
Would you have any issue with Democrats co-sponsoring?
Well, I hope people who are committed to equality for the LGBTQ community would not support that bill, because it would put in statute and authorize expressly discrimination against the LGBTQ community.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. I am back, and we are back to putting kids in cages. Seriously. When Trump did it, we were all outraged, all of us. Now Biden is back to doing it, and what? Crickets. This was wrong when the Obama administration started it, and it was absolutely wrong when Trump did it, much worse. And it is wrong now. Biden and Harris denounced Trump during the campaign, what he was doing with the incarceration of children. Let's roll that clip.
We're all here because we know that we have to stand up for our America when the Trump administration overlooks the fact that what is happening with the detention of these children, the circumstances by which they arrived, is a human rights abuse being committed by the United States government. And so we are here to stand up and say that we are not going to allow this to happen, not on our watch. I will tell you, when elected, the first thing I'm going to do, one of the first things, is to shut down these private detention facilities. Just shut them down. Because let's be clear about what's going on here. There are people who are literally profiting off of the incarceration of children.
It is now a little over a month since she was inaugurated with President Biden. And on Monday, the Department of Health and Human Services reopened a Trump-era facility in Texas to house up to 700 teenage migrants. A second facility is also being reopened in Florida. This is the one at Homestead, where Kamala Harris made that campaign speech we just showed you. So instead of shutting down a facility she called a human rights abuse, her government is reopening it because, Madam Vice President, can you finish the sentence for me? Because I can't. The Biden White House insists this is temporary and that it's necessary because of COVID and an increase in unaccompanied minors crossing the border. Oh, and White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki insists, quote, this is not putting kids in cages. Oh, sorry, Jen, my bad. It seemed a little bit similar. Reopening these detention centers is not the answer. This is cruel. This is inhumane. I thought everyone to the left of Trump in 2020 agreed on this. This is a dangerous example of a double standard that will corrode the credibility of this administration. There really are things that are right, and there are things that are wrong, clearly. And if we start saying it is okay when Obama does it, or okay when Biden does it, but it is an outrage when Trump does it, we drain all the moral content, all of it. And politics becomes nothing but red versus blue versus whatever. It's a color war. That's all it is. Is it okay when my side does it because we mean well, and it's wrong when your side does it because we know you are racists and goons? Come on. We really are better than this. People see through this. We need a humane immigration system. We all know this, from far left to at least moderate right. We all came together against separating families and putting children in cages just a few months ago. That is the place to begin building back a better immigration system. But if we sink back into make-do management and patchwork solutions, we will lose all momentum to get the work done of creating a new system, a system of justice and humanity, a system that people around the world look to and say, oh, that is the America that so many immigrants fleeing inhumane circumstances went to. The only winners in this system are the private contractors who run those facilities. We can do better. And for the good of this administration, we have to do better. We have to find another way, a more humane way to look after these kids. We have to understand what's happening at the border, not patchwork. These are humans. These are human lives. This is a human rights crisis, as Vice President Kamala Harris said. We have a wonderful show for you today. We have Natalie Shure and Arun Chaudhary is back. What? He is a regular. Thank you to Arun for filling in for me yesterday. And we'll talk to him a little bit later. But before that, we have Steve Paxton, who is the author of Unlearning Marx. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. I can't wait to have it with him. We'll be right back right after the break. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Steve Paxton is the author of Unlearning Marx, Why the Soviet Failure Was a Triumph for Marx. He is also, in addition to an academic career culminating in doctoral research with G.A. Cohen at Oxford, Steve Paxton has worked on building sites and embedding shops, a PHP program. This is a whole other industry. It's amazing. Thanks for joining the show, Steve. We appreciate you being here. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
We're all pros now, which is
Okay.
pros at not unmuting ourselves. Yeah. So Steve, I mean, this is a fascinating take on Marx. And I guess let's just start off with what inspired you to write this book.
I guess so. Partly in response to this kind of right-wing talking point, which is that anything they don't like is Marxist, and Marx is responsible for the Soviet Union. So as soon as anyone suggests that maybe it might be an idea to kind of have a bit less inequality or something, up pop Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and all the others to say that that's the start of the slippery slope to the gulags. And during my kind of studies of Marx, it's very obvious that this is just a really wrong-headed way to look at Marx. So for one thing, Marx predicted failure for revolutions in Russia. And he even wrote to Russian revolutionaries in the 1880s and told them that he gave them a little bit of a get-out clause, which was that if other countries, more advanced countries, joined in, if the Russian Revolution sparked revolutions elsewhere, then there was a chance that a Russian revolution might be successful. But on the whole, he thought that a revolution must come from the most advanced capitalist countries. And the reason for that is really that socialism requires a certain amount of material wealth.
Right.
If you try to kind of equalize everything when you just don't have enough stuff, all you do is share out shortfall, and that annoys everyone, and that's not sustainable. So his phrase was, all the old filthy business would be restored. So he's very clear. His whole theory of history revolves around the idea that you need to have capitalism first, and you need to have quite advanced capitalism. Capitalism is really good at producing the technological advances, huge leaps in productive capacity to provide the material abundance that makes socialism viable.
It's so interesting. I interviewed somebody a few months ago, and I said that. I remember her face turning, and I said, no, I mean, my interpretation, and I hope I wasn't reinventing history, was exactly what you just said. But why do you think that that part of the narrative gets completely eliminated from the conversation, and much of it about ending capitalism or challenging capitalism, depending on what you want to, how you want to interpret it?
Well, I think some of it is left out because the people who control the media and everything don't want that in the narrative.
Yeah.
But also, I think we on the left as well have to kind of take some blame, because we often look at Marx through the prism of Lenin and Trotsky. Right. And that's their view. They both knew, and they both said in the early days of the revolution that there was no way they could survive, that the regime could survive without sparking revolutions elsewhere. And they put a lot of effort into trying to spark those revolutions. But when they didn't happen, then the Soviet Union took a different course. But I think theoretically, people tend to look more at what Lenin and Trotsky did right, what Stalin probably did wrong, is most people's take on things. And we tend to judge the Soviet Union in terms of how socialist it was, whether it ever achieved socialism, how close they came, whether they were on the right track. And actually, really, that's diverting us away from looking at the way that Marx may have looked at it. It's understandable because they claim to be a socialist country, and I think they were genuinely trying to be a socialist country. But they very rarely had the chance to actually implement socialist policies. Most of the time, they were reacting to hostilities from outside and internal pressures as well. And Lenin said a few times that just everyone knows socialism is impossible. The immediate introduction of socialism in Russia is impossible. But those circumstances never got any better, and socialism was never really a viable option in the Soviet Union, particularly if you look at that from Marx's point of view.
And he focused so much on cities for this reason in particular, right? I mean, even though it was organizing in cities, organizing in urban communities where there was some sort of production.
That's true. And the problem, part of the problem really, is that in Russia in 1917, about 75% of the population were working in agriculture, which means, and that's equivalent to the position England was in about 1600. So when you've got 75% of people working in agriculture, they're each producing enough food for themselves and a third of another person. And that's just not enough to sustain towns and urban growth and the industrialization that comes along with that. You need to have a kind of a revolution in agriculture and in agricultural production before you can build on that and kind of develop an industrial proletariat. And so
no, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that I look at in the book, really, once we can get out of the so firstly we need to get out of the way this idea that Marx is somehow to blame for the Soviet Union, recognize that he said that this revolution in Russia is unlikely to work. Then we can kind of take a step back and we can look at what Marx's theory of history says how we would look at it if it was any other country. And when we look at Russia in 1917, it was very similar in many ways to England in 1600. And so in a book, I go through the process that Marx describes. He spends a lot of time describing the emergence of capitalism in England. And he lists a set of criteria which were not in place in 1600 and which had to come into place before capitalism could emerge. And actually, when you then look at the Soviet Union, you see exactly those criteria being met. Some of them before the revolution from the 1860s, there was the emancipation of the serfs, but then really nothing very much changed until 1917. And various processes that happened in the Soviet Union, such as the collectivization of agriculture, that's almost the same as a process of eviction and enclosure going on in England. It took a much longer time in England, and they had to keep waiting for new technology to be invented. So it's kind of really condensed in the Soviet Union. But if you can try and get out of your head the whole thing about trying to create socialism and whether or not they failed at that, and look at the things that the policies that they did and the changes that those policies made compared from 1917 until 1990, what they did was they put in place the missing pieces that, according to Marx, capitalism needs before it can develop. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed due to pressures from inside and outside, and the weight of its own kind of inefficiency and bureaucracy, then the Russian oligarchs swept in, and that was the start really of Russian capitalism in 1990. So you can see the Soviet period and the immediately preceding period almost as Russia's transition from feudalism to capitalism.
Interesting. Did they did he ever write about the fear of a bureaucracy? I mean, obviously the failures of the USSR, so much of it being bureaucracy and political, however you want to say it, like the insider politics, the way that every sort of political infrastructure corrupts itself.
There was a lot, and around kind of the Paris Commune and various events around there were lots of kind of infighting, I guess. Not necessarily infighting, but discussions and debates about the best way to proceed. And it's surprising, actually, most people who haven't read any Marx are quite surprised to realise that he didn't really write very much about what socialism or communism would look like. That's not to say he didn't say anything about it, but there's no kind of detailed blueprint there. There's a kind of a 10-point plan early on in his life, but as he got older, he was much more kind of he was much more open about exactly how these things might be achieved. And I think it's naive to imagine that you're going to everyone's going to swan off into a socialist sunrise without any debates over how exactly that should be organized. But I don't think really kind of preempting that was a thing that occupied Marx very much.
So how much of this was performative to inspire folks to get moving, knowing very well that there would be failures, and in his lifetime he would not see the ultimate fall?
I think quite a lot, and I think you have to remember there's Marx isn't kind of a single data point. His work is something, it evolved over decades. He wrote millions of words in books and journals and articles in newspapers and lots of correspondence. And there's kind of, as well as people often talk about a young Marx and an old Marx, but there's also Marx the political agitator and Marx the journalist and Marx the economist. And the one that is often forgotten is Marx the historian, and that's really who I'm trying to bring out in this book. He's not a historian that looks at the past and just says, oh, look, here's a collection of things that happened. Isn't that interesting? He's somebody that tries to put them together and understand the meaning of what's happening and to work out the processes that drive social change and historical change. And I think that's why this is important, because if we can take lessons from how we got from feudalism into capitalism, that might help us understand how we're going to get out of capitalism into something better that's going to come after it.
Which, of course, Rosa Luxemburg was fully aware of.
Sure.
I remember, I mean, you talk about the British, where they were in the stage that, 1600s versus 1900s Russia. But, what about, you mentioned the Paris Commune. I mean, what about the French Revolution and how much of that was an inspiration? Were the conditions similar in France to Russia when the revolutions went underway?
Similar, I think, yes. And I think if you look at what happened in England in the 17th century and France in the 18th century, the revolutions there, which kind of inspire a lot of people today, actually these were revolutions that overthrew feudalism and introduced capitalism. And so that kind of goes with my approach to say, well, actually, that's really what's happened in Russia through the Soviet era, is the overthrow of feudalism and the introduction of capitalism. Even though no one in the Soviet Union wanted capitalism, obviously, they weren't trying to lay the foundations of it. But the things that they had to do to respond to the crises they faced led to those things being put in place, according to Marx's kind of checklist of things you must have before capitalism. The Soviets put most of those in place. So I think there are similarities there. Obviously, the ideology was different. There was an intention to overthrow feudalism and to introduce kind of bourgeois ideology and bourgeois equality from France in 1789, whereas in Russia they were not at all trying to do that. They just ended up putting those things in place.
Can you explain just like a little bit more in detail about why specifically capitalism was needed? Was it because, we talk about the revenue, was it because the state didn't have enough money to provide for everybody? Can you break that down?
Why capitalism is needed before you can have socialism? Yeah. So Marx sees it really. So that the main thing is the material abundance. You can't really have socialism until you've got enough stuff to share out. Really, in capitalism, how do you get the technology to create enough stuff for everybody? Is you have capitalism, and the reason for that is obviously nobody kind of designed capitalism. It emerges out of feudalism as an aggregate of lots of separate kind of agendas and decisions. But once capitalism gets going, it's so productive that whoever is adopting capitalism has an advantage over those that don't, because they're able to have access to much better technology and much more productive capacity. And that kind of creates this race, and it creates its own momentum. And capitalism, Marx argues that capitalism is the only system really that can do that. It's the only system that can create industrialization and urbanization. And socialism requires that level of technology, according to Marx.
And the state can't. The state can't do that. They were not in a position at that time, at least, to create that type of industrialization.
The state, yeah, I mean, historically they weren't in that position, and I think for Marx, conceptually, they just are not. That's not a thing the state can do. The state can't mimic the kind of the invisible hand of the market, which is. It's not, it has lots of casualties. Marx isn't saying it's a great thing, but he's saying it has a role to play, and right. You can't not have that capitalist era, because no other system can develop the technology that's required. That's Marx's kind of. He's really firm on that. And that's what he's writing to Russian revolutionaries in the 1880s for, is because they're writing to him saying, hang on a minute, you're saying that we can't have a revolution and it's going to fail. And he's very ambiguous in his kind of personal letters back, but that his message is, well, basically, yeah, that's it. And then a couple of years later, he comes up with this get out for them, which is, well, you can have a revolution so long as you spark revolutions in Germany and England and maybe America.
Right, exactly. And then in the pushback at the time, I think we're all aware of some of the dynamics, but can you describe the specific arguments between, the Trots and the whole community of the infighting that was happening, I guess is the clearest way of saying it, between this specific dynamic?
What do you mean in 1917?
Yeah.
Russia?
Yeah. I mean, we all adore him now, but not so much at the time, right?
But Marx, do you mean?
Yes, Marx.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, there was a lot of infighting about exactly kind of how to get around Marx's prediction that a revolution in Russia wasn't going to work. And Lenin and Trotsky both came out basically and just said that's it. We need to inspire revolutions in Germany. Germany was the obvious candidate because it was industrializing quickly and it was nearby, and it had a strong socialist element. But their failure to do that really then left them isolated. They had about a period of several years fighting off basically a counter-revolution from within, and also as soon as World War I ended, then most of the Western powers sent troops there to fight against the revolution as well. So they're kind of being bombarded from all sides. And by the time they came out of that, the country was kind of destroyed. They'd had World War I, they then had a revolution, they then had this long period of civil war. And Lenin then took them back, sort of took a step back and introduced what he called the new economic policy, which was kind of a concession back to the market. Private property was allowed, private employment was allowed. And he did this because he kind of recognized that they needed to industrialize, they needed to electrify Russia. And he kind of conceded that the market was the best way to do that. And there's a lot of opposition to that, but it worked kind of quite well. And they were looking at moving out of that into a system of 5-year plans at the time that Lenin died. And even as the kind of the infighting after that, with Stalin kind of rising to power, the 5-year plans were looked on as kind of they felt like they needed to take the peasantry with them.
Right.
With the they needed to convince the peasantry that industrialization was needed, and they were going to have to give up some of their surplus, and they were going to have to produce more surplus. But they were going to help them along with that, and that was how they saw it. Whether that would have happened or not, we don't know. But certainly, as soon as Stalin kind of consolidated his position, then all of that went out of the window, and all the targets became hugely unrealistic, and the methods then became quite brutal. And that's something which actually, going back to the situation which Marx talks about with the emergence of capitalism in England, the same process, tearing the peasants off the land and basically enclosing their land into huge, much more efficient farms, and then creating from this peasantry who had felt attached to the land, you're creating a class of landless proletarians to go off and work in the cities. That was quite brutal in the Soviet Union in the 30s, but it was no less brutal in England in the 16th century when that process was going on. They introduced slavery for a short time to basically enslave people who kind of tried to resist the early enclosure. And there were various things with branding people on the forehead, cutting off half an ear, selling their children, that kind of thing. All this was going on in England when we were doing that same process of basically confiscating the land from the people who were occupying it.
Right. How does this relate to today? I mean, you mentioned the Ben Shapiro's of the world, and the Heritage Foundation types that are, doing their best to smear the legacy of Marx and confuse their audiences as to what socialism or Marxism or whatever. I mean, they lump it all together. But I mean, other than that, I mean, how do the lessons from what we've missed on Marx relate to the movement today? I guess that's what.
Okay, so I think there's two main things really. One is that we need to stop this kind of blaming Marx for the Soviet Union and kind of trying to discount everything Marx ever wrote because the Soviet Union happened and it didn't succeed. So that's one side of things. But the other is that when we look at this, people often come, as I say, people come to Marx often through Lenin and Trotsky, and of course, because they're involved in the Russian Revolution, their language is very political and very much about kind of seizing the means of production. And the other way into Marx is often the Communist Manifesto, which is, again, it's short, it's quite easy to read, but that was really the work of, Engels wrote most of it and Marx kind of redrafted it, but it was done on commission in a hurry. And Marx, it's kind of a call to arms, and the 1848 revolutions are going on around them. But that's really the work of Marx, the journalist. If you look at Marx, the theorist, and Marx, the thinker, and the person who analyzes how change works, the process of revolution doesn't have to mean manning the barricades and storming the Winter Palace. And actually, when you look at his discussion of the revolution which got us from feudalism into capitalism, although there were flashpoints, there was 1789 in France, there was the English Civil War, and we had the Glorious Revolution as well in 1688. Those are that's like the end of the revolution. That's the actual revolution is the change in the way the economy works, the change in the way we understand what property is and who owns what property, and even what type of property can be owned. For a lot of human history, people were included in the set of things that can be owned. And pre-capitalist conceptions of property were very different to our kind of idea of property. People often had shared rights in things, and the peasantry felt a real kind of, although they didn't own the land in that they couldn't sell it or bequeath it, they had a right to work on it, and they had a right to the fruits of it, or to some of that. And I think So one of the things we can learn from that is that the actual revolution, the vital processes that took us from feudalism into capitalism, were these changes in the understanding of what property means and the relationships between people and who owned what. And then those flashpoints like the English Civil War, the Glorious Revolution and the French Revolution, this is kind of when the revolution is nearly complete. The bourgeoisie have amassed this amount of power, and they're now in a position to seize political power and start formally running things their way and to introduce these kind of bourgeois institutions. But the actual revolution is a long process. It's not a seizure of power. And I think that is kind of a message for us now, because we're looking at, how are we going to get out of where we are? How are we going to get out of capitalism? And clearly, we're not going to seize the media production. That's not going to happen. We don't have the guns. We don't have the numbers. It's just, if we did it, too many things that are really important would actually, and too many people that we are supposed to be helping would actually end up suffering greatly by huge interruptions to supply chains and production processes. So we need to move there. We need to, and the way to do that is to take people with us. So we need to start winning some arguments. And then there's a whole kind of debate, which is subject for my next book, where there's this whole debate about what those arguments are and politically how we organise and how we do that, and what our objectives and aims should be and what our methods should be. But I think that's the lesson is that the real changes are not the seizure of political power. The real changes are the underlying economic processes.
It's interesting. And not written about enough, just about how much the fabric of our society would fall apart. I mean, whether it's the infrastructure, telecom infrastructure. I mean, ask anybody in a hurricane-torn city right now, just how important it is to understand.
David Harvey got I think, was it last year, he talked about capitalism being too big to fail. And I think that was an unfortunate choice of words. I perhaps wouldn't have used that phrase, because it reminds us of the banks being bailed out because they're too big to fail. But I can see where he's coming from. If some big seizure of power happens tomorrow, there are vaccination programs all over the southern hemisphere. There are aid programs, there are industrial programs. There are people. Who's going to work tomorrow? Do you know? You're going to get paid? It's not 1917. It's not 1789. The world is a very complicated and interconnected place, and that's not to say, I'm not saying, oh, well, we have to put up with it or anything else. I think, but we need to be very sure about where we're going and how we're going to get there. And I think left, the question of revolution or reform, we have completely the wrong discussion there. We have that discussion in terms of means. Revolution is throwing cocktails and reform is joining a union or something. That's not actually what that question is. Revolution or reform is the question of ends. Do we try to reform capitalism, or do we have a revolution? A revolution would move us out of capitalism into socialism, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to get there by a sudden violent insurrection. We can have a revolution that takes time. And Marx was open to that idea as well, that the older he got, the more he talked. As things like universal suffrage were being pushed for, he was kind of quite optimistic about the prospects of democracy being used to introduce socialism.
Fascinating conversation, very timely. Steve, I'm excited to read your next your next book, if it does touch on where we go from here and the tactics, because it's extremely important for this moment. Thank you for writing this book. Go check out Steve Paxton's book, Unlearning Marx. It is perfect for the moment. Why the Soviet failure was a triumph for Marx, and go correct all those right wingers who are out there trolling us, smearing, and go. Maybe it's a great gift for your family members, your neoliberal family members who probably agree with you on a lot of things, but may not necessarily understand why. It's a good introduction piece. Steve Paxton, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back in a second with our panel, our great panel for today's news. Thank you, Steve. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Oh, hey there. It's Nomiki Show host Arun Chaudhary. I just want to give a shout out to Arun. Thank you for filling in for me yesterday. I was unable to host. Sometimes that happens. Life gets in the way. Real fun, but I heard you killed it.
No, it was exciting for me, and I really learned how hard that. I forget who it is, one of the late night talk show people, but they were like, that opening like monologue thing is the thing that'll kill you. That's the thing that'll kill you. Talking to people's easy, you know what I mean? A couple of questions, national security, blah blah blah, you know. But like actually being like, I'm going to tell you something about something, that's hard.
And then thinking of something every day. I wake up. I mean, now with the Biden administration, there's plenty to talk about. But there was this the every 5 seconds having a Trump crisis always gave you some spin on something. So
a lot of news hooks.
A lot of news. That's the term, the hooks. Arun Chaudhary, of course, is a political filmmaker. He is guest host now. He was the former first official White House videographer and worked as creative director for Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign for president. And Natalie Shure, welcome back. She is a writer and researcher. She's written in The Nation, The Atlantic, Buzzfeed, Jacobin, et cetera, et cetera. You are the head of research for Adam Ruins on Everything still, right? Yes?
The show's no longer on.
I thought I was
thinking.
I was reading and I'm like, am I missing something? Because I thought it was. Well, go back and look at it if you can find the archives.
Okay, I will.
We will correct that. All right. So, Marjorie Taylor Greene, total crazy woman. She is taking every opportunity to be performative and rile up her base. You know, the crazy base that stormed the Capitol with guns and Nazi slogans, and I mean, just horrifying. She has created a form of protest in the halls of Congress. Let's play this clip real quick. Okay, so she is against the Equality Act. Her neighbor, Marie Newman, newly elected, wants to pass the Equality Act to as Marjorie Taylor Greene says, to destroy women's rights and religious freedoms. And Rep. Newman mentioned that her daughter is trans, so it's a direct attack on her family. But it doesn't even matter because, I mean, man. All right, performative. What's the goal here? I'll go to Arun first. Natalie, we lost your camera.
I mean, for sure, performative. And I think there's a lot of people who think that there's a lot of juice you can get out of kicking these culture issues just as hard as you can to squeeze some more votes out of your, district that has a certain makeup that people feel like is conservative and all that. But like, I don't quite understand. It's sort of a little bit hackneyed in terms of execution. Like, is this a sign from some other thing that no one's really sure what the trust the science part is referring to? I mean, I would say that it is performative, but a performative failure.
Well, I mean, performative failure, yeah, raising money, whatever. She's using all these things, but it's still keeping that
some money.
Yeah, raising some money, but also the question is like, where does Trump's movement go now? And it's larger than I think we probably even feel, given the electoral results, the number of people who voted for him. Natalie, I mean, like, what's your take? Is this performative or something about like continuing this Trumpist movement, this right-wing extremist movement, and keeping it together?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I make the same point every time I come on your show. So I hope your guests don't, or your audience doesn't think I'm a broken record. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the Republican Party exists to be a wish fulfillment for capital, right? Mm-hmm. Their function is to do whatever they can to make the richest people on earth even richer still. And that's not popular. By definition, that is a very unpopular platform. And so over time, I think that they've really stoked culture war issues to try to peel more votes. They did that with the Bible Belt in the 80s, really consolidated the religious right. Over the past couple of years, I think that you've seen them lean harder into, overt white supremacy. Now I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is sort of coming from this, Facebook comment cesspool, this newly coalescing group of people
It's like plucked
And,
from
the
it and
difference
made
between,
human.
the difference between, the Republicans from a couple years ago and now, because like the Republicans were still leaning hard against these things. This vileness was always there. But I think up until the Trump era, at least the elected officials would want some, disingenuous distance from this sort of overt ugliness, right? It was so disingenuous because obviously they relied on this coalition, but from the elected officials themselves, you wouldn't have people saying and doing this kind of thing, and the things that Trump said and did, and the things that Marjorie Taylor Greene says and do. And I think that Trump's insight and, the bandwagon that Marjorie Taylor Greene is jumping onto is the idea like, oh, well, when you just say it, they get excited. So you might as well do that. And so, the overt callous cruelty, I think, is the one difference. And so that is startling, just in terms of representation in the media, things like that. Just the absolute cruelty to just callously misgender a colleague's teenage child like that is just, I can't imagine doing that to somebody personally, right? It's just unbelievable.
Well, they can do it. If you have somebody in the party who's willing to be that extreme, then it makes the Romneys of the world and the DeSantises, even though, there's even division between the two of them, obviously, look more palpable. And I want to roll this clip from The View about the future nominee of the Republican Party, because Romney seems to think it's going to be Trump. Doesn't mean he agrees, but let's, there we go.
Let's hear
really is a scary thing. I guess I shouldn't be shocked.
The GOP is already looking ahead to 2024. This was surprising to me, because what's the point of running if you already know who the winner is going to be? Now, Mitt Romney is saying that if you know who decides to run again, he would definitely get the nomination. But you just wiped out all these other people who might consider running. And some Republican pollsters say Florida governor Ron DeSantis could be in the running because he's polling far ahead of other Florida Republicans like Marco Rubio. What is the point of all of this? This is for us to talk about you-know-who, when you-know-who is facing a whole lot of other jail time, possibly, in the future. So why would they...
I think it's because of ratings. But they're like, the ratings have been going down now that Trump's not in office. But the reality is we should be thinking about the future of fascism has been growing or leanings towards fascism or fascist actions, as you could say, and who's gonna pick up this movement and keep it together. Arun, you've been across the world fighting these guys. Any wisdom that you can send across the seas to us?
I actually would rely less on that and more on my credentials as a Trumpologist. I always watch the whole rally. Like I tell everyone, don't just watch the clips. You got to watch the whole rally. You really got to get into it. I'm actually would love to hear what y'all think, because I am absolutely confounded. I think it's sort of a 7-10, 50-50 split, however difficult thing you want to do it, where Donald Trump, the talented Mr. Trump, is the man to lead the party that he has recreated in his image. He's really good at it. He knows what makes good television. He knows how all those things work. Also, he's rather dumb and super lazy and was a really terrible president. And it's hard to run on a really bad record of denying the disease, getting the disease, the series of things that, as we've talked about many times on your show, that even so, his innate talent almost brought him back to win again. So there is something sort of off, idiosyncratic and magic about him. And I can't decide if that means that he has to be the inevitable nominee or if just, Tom Cotton or some other Trump without some polite Southern Trump isn't the answer. I don't know.
Is there a leader in the Republican Party who would be able, other than Mitch McConnell, who would have the power to stop Trump from running again? And I agree with you, Ron. It came down to 3 states and 42,000 votes, and the Democrats lost seats. Not quite a win for the Democrats. Seems like it's growing. I will, as much as I hate covering Republicans all day long, there's a point where we actually have to, as a movement, recognize like Biden didn't do so great, and we need to prepare for what we might be up against. So even though it's 4 years from now, or what we need to kill in the
It's not
meantime.
who inherits Trump's coalition as much as who can have Trump's coalition and regular old Republicans at the same time, because that is a majority coalition, and anything less than that isn't.
Yeah, but he's still got regular Republicans. I mean, except for a few in swing states, like Kasich Republicans. Maybe that's I don't know. I mean, Natalie, is there anybody who can stop him?
Well, two things. One thing, a lot of people are obviously concerned that he's going to run again and win. And I'm not saying that's not a concern, but what I do find heartening about that is I still think that, I mean, media and media prowess is key to understanding Trump and his rise. He didn't win the presidency on purpose. I mean, he was, running for a bunch of earned media. He was looking to kind of get set up as, a right-wing pundit. And, he screwed up and did too well and won, bumbling into the office in a way that I think was like a true indictment of Democrats and our media and political culture and many other things. So all of that said, I think that that's going to be the role that he falls back into over the next couple of years. And let's be honest, he likes that so much more. If he gets to be just a guy doing punditry on TV and every once in a while doing like massive rally-esque events that sell out, he's going to love that. I'm not sure that he'll want to jump back into, electoral politics, but I do think that he will emerge as a very obvious kingmaker. What king he makes, people keep talking about, the next Trump, it'll be someone who's already in office. I think that they should be looking closer at media figures. That's what was such a big draw to Trump and helped him cobble together the coalition that he did. I mean, in terms of who could replace him, I don't know, Tucker Carlson.
Dorsey's texting, I'm thinking Tucker, you're doing it wrong like Tucker.
I know, it comes up over and over again. He is,
and he'll have Glenn Greenwald's endorsement too. It'll be like a whole pie.
I mean, whoever the kingmaker is, he's the tastemaker. That's for sure. He's the one who sets the agenda every night.
Yeah, no, he does. I mean, he had his ear. He plays populist, just like Trump played populist, even though he's wealthy. He comes from, a very wealthy family, has only had privileged upbringings. And yet, he is the king of all populists. And there's like this little red-brown alliance that's circling around Tucker too. So, to bring in any extra votes that they need. I think that's a good prediction. It's the only person I can think of too. And we should stop him now. We should make sure that all of his advertisers pull out based on the next stupid thing he said, just like Bill O'Reilly was taken down. We'll see if that happens.
There is something about being a one-term president, though. It makes you like a wounded animal. And so I think there's always this sort of part of you that wants to become whole by winning again. There's something, all the one-termers, they're just a little off. So you do want to keep your eye on them.
Well, Jimmy Carter at least revived.
He was off in a good way, but still, they're an idiosyncratic lot.
You'd think that he was like an actual leftist as a president. Turns out he wasn't. All right. So speaking of leftist presidents that could have been, Bernie Sanders, of course, he called Walmart the largest welfare recipient in the United States because Walmart made over $15 billion in profit last year alone. And yet, of course, they pay wages so low to tens of thousands of their employees and putting them on public assistance to apply for public assistance because they don't have full-time hours. They have a hole in their HR department. They also give you the applications for welfare assistance and if you qualify for Medicare, whatever. It's horrifying. It's a horrifying company, and it seems like because we've been so focused on Amazon, people forget that the warm up to Amazon was Walmart, all around the $15 minimum wage, of course. I feel like we've been fighting Walmart since I was in high school. I know that, and that's been a long time, to put it lightly. Why do you think that there's been so little? The movement has not been able to tap into Walmart the way that there's been pushback against Amazon, for instance. Little bit of success around Amazon, and hopefully more soon out of Bellamar. Arun, what's your take?
Well, I mean, look, and I think Natalie is going to jump over the top of exactly what I say and be like, yes, and immediately. But I think Walmart is very specifically an example of a corporation that captured the hearts, minds, and pockets of both Republicans and Democrats, very specifically, especially because the Clintons hailing from Arkansas, et cetera. And so they are just baked into the very cake of legislation about how retail works in America. Like, they have been writing quite literally the law around how companies like themselves can operate. And so I think they're pretty pleased with the environment they find themselves in, and it will take a lot of undoing to get them out. Well, Amazon and some of the other people who are relying on big tech, it's a bit of uncharted territory with a will they, won't they, with the government regulating them. Walmart's already been their own sheriff and figured it out.
Do you think that they could we could pit Walmart and Amazon against each other? I don't know. That's just my thought. Natalie, I know you got some thoughts.
Well, to carry on as promised, yes, and to Arun, and I guess, in terms of pitting them against each other, I think in a capitalist society, every firm is trying to become, the dominant mega capitalist. So in that case, I guess that they are in competition for domination, but they're also, two people at the helm of the capitalist class. And so that, puts them in cahoots with each other. So they're going to have some class solidarity. As for, why is Walmart still riding high and Amazon is less so? I think I don't buy the premise. I think as Arun was saying, I think that, there's a lot of bipartisan support for both of these companies insofar as capital has captured our political system from both sides, more largely, to a larger degree on the Republican side. But, capital is part of the Democratic coalition too. And I think that the Bernie Sanders movement, part of the goal is to push capital out of the Democratic coalition. But it's still very much there. I think that the key to disempowering both of them is a more powerful labor movement and a more powerful left. So, Amazon is taking out all of the tactics that Walmart has to beat this union movement down. And, I hope it loses. And I'd love to see a resurgent organizing movement within Walmart as well. But, I think that we have to think about this more broadly, and that, the key to beating both of them is a resurgent militant left.
And but the difference is you still have fundamentally, if Amazon's eliminated tomorrow, communities aren't left without grocery stores, which is something that Walmart did so well in eliminating, so many small businesses across, rural communities, different communities. So, they've been much more strategic, and obviously it was the timing too with the internet. But all right, let's talk a little bit about the $15 minimum wage, because this is something that's just infuriating me. We don't have a clip of this, but I was watching CNBC yesterday, and I saw an economic expert talk about how we really need to ease into the $15 minimum wage. We just have to it has to be over time. I'm like, mother effers. First off, $15 minimum wage was chosen, the fight for 15, because of alliteration, not because of some sort of economic projection. True story. But also it started 10 years ago. I don't have to tell you guys this, you know it, but this is a fight that started 10 years ago. It is way what it should be. Nobody in America can live off of $15 an hour and pay for a 1-bedroom apartment, at least pre-COVID, who knows now. Why have we what could we possibly do at this point to move Democrats, mainstream centrist Democrats, into understanding how this is the most basic negotiation. This is the most basic negotiation, but it's not working. The tactics need to something needs to shift. Arun. Anybody jump in. Come on.
Look, there's nothing to say. It's sort of Democrats gonna Democrat. It's Lucy in the football, sort of shame on us. As Bernie would put it, if you don't ask for the whole loaf, you're just gonna get crumbs. Why are we giving things away before people are voting already? Just the last couple of weeks, we've really seen the Biden administration cave on a lot of its promises, a lot of its more progressive promises, and seem to adopt negotiation tactics that are just not going to get people the goods. So all I have to say is Democrats are making the same mistakes that they always make, and that's sad.
I mean, it's becoming exhausting. I mean, the fact that we're speechless because we've been complaining about this for the last, since Obama.
And then
or
with this,
before.
we have literally the same people. It's the same
Same
cabinet making the same decisions. It's a little crazy.
It's
hard
totally
to keep track
crazy.
of.
I mean, I just like I'm just furious that we didn't go bigger. Like if you're going to get crumbs, why not go bigger? Why can't Bernie Sanders step up and say like $30 minimum wage or $25? I'm a $30 gal.
If you're just making it up based on how it sounds, I think low 20s to me, messaging wise, sounds something like 23, something below 25 sounds right. But
I don't think that's a great idea. I think it should be based on something realistic.
Yeah.
But Natalie, I mean, this to me did not seem like it was going to be as much of a fight as it ended up being. We're in a pandemic. The economy's crashing still. We still don't have a good sense of it. It's been on the platform for the last 2 cycles with a fight, but almost every single union in America that gives to Democrats supports a $15 minimum wage. Biden, he acknowledged he needed to win with Latinos, and they've been a big part of the fight for 15. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this issue, along with a couple others, most gallingly illustrate whose side the Democrats really are on at the end of the day. I mean, this should be such a gimme, right? Like $15 an hour, which already, as you've already noted, is lower than a living wage, something that people have been talking about for years, that's enormously successful, that's already been passed in a couple of states without the, negative boogeymen that they're always warning about. I mean, now with the unified, Senate House presidency, they can do it in budget reconciliation. The fact that they are not absolutely jumping at this chance is absolutely infuriating, absolutely galling. And the next time someone tells you that Democrats aren't on the side of Capitol, you can laugh in their face.
Well, and I'm curious
that's not an answer. That's just
no. I think you're right. I think, but it's so interesting. Is like, okay, obviously there's a ton of interests that are giving to the Democratic Party, but I want to know who's calling. I want to know who's calling these senators, which industries, which specific lobbyists are the ones. Like, I don't believe all capital that gives to the Democratic Party is this effing dumb. I just don't. If Florida can pass a $15 minimum wage with Ron DeSantis and all the right wing and small business, organizations and lobbyists fighting against it, then I'd like to understand who specifically is doing this. Who are they listening to? Are they just the usual actors, or is there a coalition? And I think we should start highlighting them. I don't know.
You think about the industries that pay, I mean, like chambers of commerce, massive, restaurant and food service and grocery business owner conglomerations. I don't know the names off the top of my head, but it's not too mysterious who's against the minimum wage. It's, the people's bosses and the owners whose bottom line would be mildly threatened by paying everyone a minimum wage. Those are the people who are against it. And frankly, those people are very politically connected and influential.
We'll see how it's, we all know it's bad politics. We'll see how bad it is. But my instinct, and I'm sure y'all share it, is that this is the first sort of paved mile of the road towards a Republican majority in the House in 2022. The rest being exactly when those checks arrive on people's doorsteps, which if it's not to the middle of March is a problem also. But these very popular with the people and not with some of the lobbyist policies are the gimmies, are the kind of freebies that Democrats should be scooping off the trees and scooping out of the streams in these first few months. And the fact that we're not here doesn't give me hope for anything being accomplished. Even it's hard to know what Biden thinks his health care for Obama is, right? If he does, and we were talking about this on the show last night, if he does subscribe to the unfortunate notion that political capital is something that you spend once rather than something you use to gain momentum, kind of FDR style, what does he want to spend it on so bad? And it's just not really clear.
Not taking children out of cages. We know that one.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's great. Just to make it clear, to clarify it, you're meaning that Obama put all of his energy into Obamacare, and then everything else kind of died as a result, with the exception of a few things, because that was the fight for the next 10 years. So Oh, well, maybe
all
it's near a
extracted
tandon,
promises
guys.
were that.
Maybe it's near a tandon. I think that might be it. I think we're going to be,
That's the hill.
that's the hill. We are all going to be in near like purgatory for the next 10 years. All right. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for joining us. Natalie Shure, Arun Chaudhary, thank you for joining us from Berlin, as usual. Thank you to everybody for watching. If you haven't already, make sure to smash that like button, click that subscribe button. I didn't do any promos today. Join us on Patreon, patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. That is how we keep the trains running. That's how we keep the lights on if the power grid's working. Trust me, it makes a huge difference. We are incredibly grateful to everybody. It is hard to do a daily show. Some shows do once a week. You know, this is a hard thing to do. And so Patreon is keeping us going because you never know what the Googles are going to do. We have to diversify, as they say in capitalism. All right, some shout outs. We have Prairie Fire Kowalski from Nebraska sending some coffee money, of course, and Pete from Oakland. On point, Nomiki. My friends and I have been talking endlessly about the Biden administration's cruel immigration behavior. Thank you for such clear advocacy. Thank you. We can't let them get away with this. They're on camera. It's the most disgusting political play I have seen in a long time, especially in this environment. Solar panels in the White House 2021, send some love. That's a very specific number, solar panels in the White House 2021. Barley Hop 67 says, Laura Trump in 2024 if Donald doesn't run. Oh my God. Yeah, there's rumors of her running for like Senate, I believe, I think it's Senate. Austin Coates says, I just got my book club book delivered today. Yes! We will talk a little bit more about that tomorrow when we have some more time. I'll talk about the next book club choice. Go sign up for a book club if you haven't already. It's fun. We have some great interviews coming up. I just got the bookings for the interviews with our authors finalized, so it's very exciting. We're getting into the groove. It takes a little bit of time because distribution is not an easy thing, I'm learning. Also, the Postal Service is under attack, which puts another, piece of frustrating just steps along the way that we have to deal with. All right, shout out to Professor Harvey K. We see you in the chats, always there. MIDI Doctors, Mario, thank you for working those algorithms. I would not know how to do that. It takes a certain type of person to understand algorithms, so thank you. And as always, thank you to our moderators on YouTube, Bob C., Chokin, The Orb, and Chuck Diesel, and on Twitch, Dorian Sapiens, A Difficult Truth, Our Means, and Nug Wrangler. Thank you for keeping the chat room troll free. And a huge welcome to our new Supermod Nightbot. Thank you. I love this. This is a great community. Guys, if you haven't already, anybody we just listed, send us your address, your mailing address to thenomikishow@gmail.com. We want to send you some swag. I want to send you one of these if we can. Do I have a bag? I don't have a bag handy. And a bag and a sticker. So please send us your information. All right, I'm out. We will see you tomorrow for Femme Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here. And to all of our patrons, we'll see you tomorrow too. Solidarity.